Taxes. We all hate them, but they are something we can't escape. From the moment of birth, they shape our lives, our governments, and our economies. But where did this system come from? Why do taxes exist? And why have they been such a source of frustration and inequality throughout history? In this episode of History's Hidden Tales, we're diving into the depressing history of taxes, from the ancient world to modern times. We'll uncover how taxes have been used to control, oppress, and manipulate populations. From the cruel taxes of ancient civilizations to the protests and revolts they sparked, this history is filled with anger, suffering, and resistance. The history of taxation goes back thousands of years, long before tax returns or IRS audits. The earliest recorded taxes date back to ancient Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE. These taxes were often collected in goods or labor, wheat, barley, cattle, or even forced work on royal projects. In Mesopotamia, taxes were seen as a divine obligation, as rulers claimed they were chosen by the gods to maintain order. Citizens were expected to give a portion of their produce, labor, and sometimes even their lives. The Sumerians, one of Mesopotamia's earliest civilizations, used tax labor to build massive structures like ziggurats and temples. These taxes weren't voluntary, they were more like forced labor, with severe penalties for refusal. Rulers held absolute power, and failure to pay could mean imprisonment, torture, or death. And it wasn't just Mesopotamia. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs established a complex taxation system requiring farmers to give up a significant portion of their crops. These taxes funded monumental projects, including the Great Pyramids. While awe-inspiring, these monuments were built on the backs of ordinary people who had no choice but to work for the state. In Egypt, if a farmer couldn't pay in grain, he might be forced to give up his land, making him landless and unable to support his family. The tax burden on common people was enormous, and many suffered under these oppressive systems. Fast forward to the Roman Empire, an empire that expanded far and wide, conquering new lands and populations. As the empire grew, so did its need for revenue to maintain armies, build roads, and fund lavish entertainment. Roman taxation reached new extremes. The Romans perfected direct taxation, land, property, and income taxes. But these weren't just for the wealthy. The common people, the plebeians, also felt the burden. In addition to land taxes, they faced sales taxes and customs duties. Even a seemingly small 1% sales tax could have a massive impact on their daily lives. Then there was the portoria, a customs duty on goods moving in and out of Roman territories. The more you traded, the more you were taxed. These taxes were especially harsh on the lower classes, who had no say in how they were levied. Tax collectors, known as publicani, were ruthless, sometimes forcing people into debt bondage to pay their dues. The wealth of Rome came at a horrific cost to the lower classes, who faced exploitation, oppression, and forced labor. Just like in earlier civilizations, failure to pay could mean death, imprisonment, or enslavement. The fall of Rome didn't end oppressive taxation. In fact, the Middle Ages saw even more brutal systems, especially in medieval Europe under feudalism. Under feudalism, lords owned the land and serfs were bound to it. Serfs worked the land and were expected to give a portion of their produce to their lord. They had little say in how much they owed, and the system kept them in perpetual poverty. But feudal lords weren't the only ones collecting taxes. The Catholic Church wielded immense power and imposed tithes, a mandatory 10% tax on income. Tithes were compulsory, and the church could seize property if taxes weren't paid. For centuries, this system drained the wealth of the people, while the clergy lived in luxury, funding massive cathedrals, monasteries, and political influence. By the 14th century, taxation reached its peak of brutality. The Black Death devastated Europe. Yet rulers demanded even more from their subjects. King Edward I of England levied exorbitant taxes to fund wars in France, leading to widespread discontent. In 1381, the Peasants' Revolt erupted in England. Thousands, led by figures like Wat Tyler, marched on London to demand an end to royal taxes. But their rebellion was brutally crushed. Tyler was killed, and taxes remained, just another example of how taxation served as a tool of oppression and control. Fast forward to the modern era, where taxes remain a source of frustration, resistance, and rebellion. Though the system evolved, the burden still falls largely on the lower classes. The American Revolution was, in part, a revolt against unfair taxes. The famous cry of "no taxation without representation" echoed as Britain imposed taxes on paper, tea and glass. These taxes funded Britain's military, but colonists had no say. This discontent fueled the revolution, leading to American independence in 1776. Similarly, the French Revolution of 1789 was driven by unbearable tax burdens. The nobility and clergy were largely exempt, while peasants were taxed at unimaginable rates. Poverty and unrest exploded, leading to the storming of the Bastille and the overthrow of the monarchy. So why does this history matter? Taxes have always been more than just funding for governments. They've been a tool of power and control. From ancient Mesopotamia to modern France, taxes have shaped societies, built empires, and sparked revolutions. The bitter truth is that while taxes might seem like a necessary evil today, history shows they've long been used to oppress the poor and consolidate power in the hands of the few. And that's the depressing history of taxes, one of oppression, inequality, and resistance. If you found this history fascinating or gained a new perspective on the taxes we pay today, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss our next episode. And let us know in the comments what part of tax history surprised you the most.